at 3:17 a.m. The sky above the Rocky Mountains was an endless black expanse, cold and silent, broken only by distant stars and the thin white trail of an aircraft cutting through the darkness. American flight AAL 721, an Airbus A320, was cruising smoothly at 36,000 feet. Its cabin lights dimmed for the overnight journey from Chicago to Los Angeles. Most passengers slept in uneasy positions, heads tilted against windows, blankets pulled tight, dreams flickering somewhere between turbulence and exhaustion. The aircraft felt alive in a quiet, reassuring way. The steady hum of the engines blended with the faint rattle of airflow along the fuselage, a sound that told everyone on board that the laws of physics were still holding. Until they weren't. The explosion came without warning. A violent boom ripped through the right wing, shaking the aircraft as if it had collided with something solid in midair. The force slammed passengers against their seats. Overhead bins burst open, spilling luggage into the aisle. A woman screamed. A baby began to cry. The plane lurched sharply to the right. Inside the cockpit, warning alarms screamed to life. Engine fire. Right. Loss of thrust. Captain Daniel Miller instinctively grabbed the control column, fighting the sudden roll. 23 years of flying, commercial, military, emergency landings, kicked in without thought. Engine fire. First Officer Luis Ramirez shouted, his eyes locked on the instrument panel. Through the right cockpit window, Miller saw it. Fire. Bright, violent orange flames tore backward from the engine nacelle, licking along the wing, leaving streaks of glowing embers that vanished into the night. Fire suppression, now. Miller barked. Ramirez flipped the switches. Nothing. The aircraft shuddered again, dropping several hundred feet in seconds. Gravity tightened its grip, pressing passengers into their seats. In the cabin, oxygen masks deployed with a sharp hiss. Yellow cups swinging wildly from the ceiling. Flight attendants struggled to stand as they smell of burning fuel crept through the air. Put your masks on. One of them shouted, her voice cracking with fear. Secure your masks. Captain Miller took a breath, forcing calm into his voice as he reached for the radio. Mayday! 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 His voice cut through the chaos. This is American Flight 721. We have an engine fire and uncontrolled descent. Static answered him. Ramirez tried a second frequency. Nothing. The fire outside intensified, casting flickering light into the cockpit like a furnace door left open. Then the radio clicked. A voice came through. Not Miller's. Not Ramirez's. It was low. Controlled. Almost. Reassuring. Air traffic control. This is callsign Angel. I have control of the aircraft. Miller froze. Ramirez turned slowly, eyes wide. Captain. That wasn't us. The radio crackled again as air traffic control responded. Confusion thick in their tone. Aircraft identifying as Angel. State your position and credentials immediately. The voice didn't answer them. Instead, it spoke softly, as if addressing the plane itself. Easy now. I've got you. The aircraft stopped rolling. The sudden stabilization was subtle, but undeniable. Miller stared at the instruments. The descent rate slowed. The nose leveled. How the hell? Ramirez whispered. In the cabin, panic reached its peak. Passengers clutched armrests. Some prayed. Others sobbed openly. A businessman frantically tried to call his wife, though there was no signal at 36,000 feet. At the very back of the plane, seat 32F, a woman jolted awake. Her name was Emily Carter. She hadn't been asleep, just pretending to be. When the explosion hit, her first instinct had been fear. But what followed was something worse. Recognition. Her heart pounded as she felt it again, the same sensation she had felt years ago. A pressure in her chest. A certainty that something impossible was happening. She opened her eyes. Smoke curled along the ceiling. Emergency lights flickered red. And in the aisle, silhouetted against the chaos, someone was standing. A man. He wasn't bracing himself. He wasn't panicking. He was calm. The fire near the galley bent away from him, as if unwilling to touch his clothes. The roaring wind inside the cabin seemed quieter around his body. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered. The man began walking forward, each step steady, deliberate, moving against the rush of terrified passengers and frantic flight attendants. No one stopped him. No one could. In the cockpit, Captain Miller felt a sudden chill crawl up his spine. The cockpit door creaked, unlocked. Slowly, impossibly, it began to open. Ramirez stared at it. "Sir, did you?" The door swung wide. A man stepped inside. Not in uniform. No insignia. No badge. Yet his presence filled the cockpit completely. Miller stood halfway from his seat. "Who the hell are you?" The man looked at him with eyes that carried something ancient and heavy. Experience far beyond years. "Daniel," the man said quietly, "listen to me." Miller stiffened. No passenger knew his first name. Outside, the engine fire flared violently. The man placed one hand on the instrument panel, the other on the captain's seat. "You've done enough," he said. "It's my turn now." The plane trembled once more, then steadied. The radio crackled. ATC tried again, voice tense. "Angel, identify yourself. This aircraft is American Flight 721. The man didn't respond. Instead, he leaned closer to Captain Miller and spoke words that chilled him to the bone. "Everyone will survive." In the last row, Emily Carter pressed her trembling hands to her mouth, tears filling her eyes, because she finally understood. The call sign, the voice, the impossible calm in the fire. Her worst fear had come true, and so had her greatest hope. She whispered into the smoke-filled cabin, "Dad." The cabin was no longer just a plane. It was a storm of fear. Smoke rolled in heavy waves along the ceiling, thick enough to sting the eyes. The emergency lights cast everything in a harsh red glow, turning faces into masks of terror. Oxygen masks dangled uselessly where passengers fumbled to secure them, hands shaking too badly to think straight. And yet, through all of it, he walked calmly forward. Emily Carter watched from seat 32F, her entire body frozen as the man moved up the aisle. He did not rush. He did not stumble. Each step was deliberate, unhurried, as though time itself had slowed around him. Passengers screamed as he passed, pressing themselves against their seats, but not one of them reached out to stop him. Some didn't even seem to notice him at all, eyes sliding past him as if he were only a shadow. Emily noticed everything. The way the fire recoiled from him near the galley. The way the wind screamed less loudly around his body. The way the floor vibrations seemed to soften beneath his feet. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She knew that walk. She had followed it down long airport corridors as a child, dragging a suitcase too big for her small hands. She had watched it disappear through security gates. Again and again, always with the same promise. "I'll be back soon, Em." Her throat tightened. "Dad," she whispered, though no sound seemed to leave her lips. A flight attendant stumbled into the aisle. Coughing violently, her uniform streaked with soot. She saw the man and shouted, "Sir, sir, get back to your seat." He didn't even turn his head. As he passed her, she suddenly stopped coughing. Her breathing steadied. She blinked, confused, then turned slowly, only to find the aisle empty behind him. The man reached the cockpit door. It was locked. Emily watched as he raised his hand. He knocked once. Not hard. Not urgent. Just a single, calm knock, like someone arriving home. Inside the cockpit, Captain Daniel Miller felt it before he heard it. A sensation crawled up his spine, cold and unmistakable. The instruments were still screaming warnings. But something else had entered the space, something heavier than fear. The knock sounded. Miller turned sharply. What the? The reinforced cockpit door clicked. Unlocked. Ramirez stared at the control panel. Captain, I didn't unlock it. The door swung open slowly, pushed by an unseen force. The man stepped inside. Up close, he looked ordinary, mid-40s, tired eyes, dark hair touched with grey. But there was something about him that didn't belong. His clothes were unmarked by smoke. His skin was untouched by heat. The cockpit fire alarm blared. Miller stood. You can't be in here. This is a secured. Daniel, the man said quietly. Miller froze. No passenger. No crew member. No one. No one ever used his first name in the cockpit. The man met his gaze, eyes steady, full of something that felt painfully familiar. You're fighting a losing battle, the man continued. The fire suppression won't respond. The wing structure will fail in 6 minutes. Ramirez snapped, Captain, who is this guy? The man turned slightly toward him. Luis Ramirez, he said. 2 kids. 1 on the way. You still keep the silver coin your mother gave you. Ramirez's face drained of color. That's impossible, he whispered. The plane lurched violently again, dropping hundreds of feet in seconds. The right wing groaned, metal screaming under stress. Miller grabbed the controls. Who are you? The man stepped closer and placed a hand over Miller's on the yoke. Instantly, the vibration eased. The descent slowed. The alarms dimmed. Miller stared at the instruments in disbelief. The man leaned in and spoke gently. You need to leave the aircraft. Miller laughed, a sharp, broken sound. Absolutely not. If you stay, the man said, everyone dies. Miller shook his head violently. I'm not abandoning my passengers. The man's expression softened. I know, he said. That's why you're the right one. Outside, flames tore violently across the wing. The man gestured toward the cockpit window. You jump, he said. I fly. Miller stared at him like he was insane. You expect me to believe. You don't need to believe, the man interrupted. You need to act. The aircraft shook again, harder this time. Ramirez shouted, Captain, structural integrity warning. Miller looked at the man's eyes again, and in that moment, he knew. He didn't understand how. He didn't understand why, but he knew. Miller exhaled slowly. If I jump, will they live? The man nodded once. Every one of them. Miller closed his eyes. Then he nodded back. The cockpit window shattered outward in an explosion of glass and wind. The roar was deafening. Cold air tore through the cockpit like a living creature. Ramirez screamed, grabbing for Miller, but it was too late. Captain Daniel Miller gave one final look at the cabin beyond the cockpit door, full of people who would never know his name. And then he was gone, pulled into the burning night sky. In the cabin, Passengers felt the plane drop and screamed as one. Emily screamed too, but her scream turned into a sob. Tears streamed down her face as the aircraft shuddered. Then, leveled. The vibration smoothed. The screaming alarms faded into silence. The plane flew straight. Perfectly. Emily pressed her shaking hands to her mouth. He had taken the controls. Her father had come back. And for the first time since the explosion, hope, terrifying and impossible, filled the cabin. Silence followed the scream. Not the comforting kind, but the stunned, disbelieving quiet that comes after disaster pauses instead of finishing its work. The aircraft no longer bucked or rolled. The violent shaking that had threatened to tear it apart moments ago eased into a steady, controlled vibration. The piercing alarms in the cockpit fell silent one by one, replaced by the soft, steady hum of systems that should not have been working. American Flight 721 was flying. In the cabin, passengers looked at one another with wide, tear-filled eyes, unsure whether they were alive or merely waiting to die. Emily Carter felt her chest tighten as she slowly removed her oxygen mask. Her hands trembled. Her heart still pounded like it was trying to escape her body. She knew. Before anyone said a word, before the flight attendants began to cautiously move again, Emily knew. He's flying the plane. The aisle ahead of her was empty now. The man who had walked through fire had vanished behind the cockpit door, taking with him the chaos, the fear, and Captain Daniel Miller. A sob escaped her lips. 12 years. 12 years since she had stood at a graveside with no body to bury. 12 years since she had been handed a folded American flag and told her father was a hero. No one had ever explained how a man could disappear from a burning aircraft at 30,000 feet. No one except her. Because she had heard his voice once before, calm, steady, and impossibly reassuring, through a crackling radio. Transmission replayed on the news. Callsign, Angel. In the cockpit. The man sat in the captain's seat as if it had always belonged to him. His hands rested lightly on the controls. He did not force them. He guided them. The right engine fire, moments ago an inferno, now flickered weakly before extinguishing completely. Fuel flow adjusted itself without command. The aircraft systems responded as though recognizing him, like an old friend returning after a long absence. The radio crackled. American Flight 721, this is Denver Center. Do you read? The man waited a beat, then answered. Denver Center, I read you. ATC froze. The voice was clear, but wrong. It didn't match the captains. It didn't match the first officers. It didn't match anyone in their database. Identify yourself, the controller demanded. You are not cleared to operate this aircraft. The man glanced at the altimeter, gently correcting their descent. I'm aware, he said calmly. The controller swallowed hard. State your name and credentials. The man paused. For the first time since entering the cockpit, his reflection caught in the darkened windshield, older than he remembered. Edges softer, eyes deeper. I was trained for this, he finally said. Trained by whom? ATC pressed. The man smiled faintly. By people who don't exist anymore. In the cabin, a murmur rippled through the passengers as the plane stabilized completely. Seatbelt signs flickered on. Flight attendants exchanged stunned looks. One of them cautiously picked up the intercom handset. Ladies and gentlemen, she said shakily, please remain seated. The aircraft is under control. No one cheered. They were too afraid to hope. Emily stood slowly, ignoring the shaking in her legs, and moved into the aisle. A flight attendant reached for her. Please sit. He's my father, Emily said. The words tasted unreal. The flight attendant blinked. What? Emily didn't answer. She was already walking forward. Inside the cockpit, the man heard her footsteps before she reached the door. He closed his eyes. She always was stubborn, he murmured. The cockpit door opened. Emily stepped inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She took him in, the familiar curve of his jaw, the scar above his eyebrow from a childhood baseball accident, the eyes she saw every time she looked in the mirror. "You're dead," she whispered. He turned to her, expression filled with something like regret. "I know." Tears streamed down her face. "I buried you." "I know." Her voice broke. "I waited." He stood and pulled her into an embrace. She felt solid arms, a beating heart, warmth. "I never left," he said softly. "I just couldn't come home." The radio crackled again. "Angel," ATC said sharply, "you are violating multiple federal aviation laws." The man sighed. "Still the rule followers," he muttered. Emily pulled back. "Why didn't you tell them?" He looked at her gently. "Because the moment they understand what I am, this ends." Outside, the runway lights appeared faintly on the horizon. ATC's voice returned, strained. "Angel, you are to follow emergency descent procedures immediately." The man adjusted their approach. "I already am." Emily stared at the controls. "How are you doing this?" He hesitated, then answered truthfully. "Some pilots don't stop flying when they die." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "That's not possible." He smiled sadly. "Neither is this plane being in the air right now." The altimeter dropped steadily. Everything was perfect, too perfect. In Denver Center, controllers watched the radar screen in silence as Flight 721 descended with textbook precision. One controller whispered, "That descent profile. It's identical to the Angel incident." The room went still. "Pull the file," someone said. A dusty record appeared on the screen. Callsign, Angel. Status, missing, presumed dead. In the cockpit, the man felt the pull begin. Not physical. Something deeper. Time was closing its grip. He placed the headset back on. "Denver Center," he said gently. "You'll have your plane." Emily grabbed his arm. "You're leaving." He nodded. "After the landing." Her voice shook. "You promised." "I know," he said. "And I kept it." The runway lights grew brighter. The plane descended smoothly. And for the first time since the explosion, everyone on board felt it. They were going to live. The runway light stretched out ahead like a path through darkness. Inside the cockpit, everything was calm. Too calm. American Flight 721 descended with flawless precision. Its speed perfectly balanced. Its angle exact to the decimal. The aircraft no longer felt damaged, no longer felt broken. It felt guided. Emily Carter stood just behind the captain's seat, her fingers gripping the doorframe as if letting go might cause everything to vanish. Her father, Captain Jonathan Carter, sat at the controls. Alive. Dead. Something in between. The ground rushed closer. "Landing gear," he said softly. The lever moved on its own. 3 green lights illuminated the panel. Emily laughed through tears. "You always hated automatic systems." He smiled faintly. "Still do." The radio crackled for the last time. American Flight 721, wind calm, runway 26 cleared to land. Jonathan leaned forward. "Copy," he replied. "Thank you for watching over them." The controller paused, confused by the phrasing. The wheels touched down. Smooth. Gentle. Perfect. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the aircraft slowed, rolling safely along the runway as emergency vehicles raced alongside, their lights painting the night in red and blue. Inside the cabin, realization spread like a wave. They were alive. A woman began to sob uncontrollably. A man laughed hysterically. Strangers hugged each other, clung to each other, whispered prayers of gratitude. The plane came to a complete stop. The engines shut down. Emily exhaled, her legs finally giving way as she sank into the jump seat behind the cockpit. She looked at her father. He was staring straight ahead now, his hands still on the controls. "Is it over?" She asked quietly. "For them," he said. "Yes." She swallowed. "And for you." Jonathan turned to her. Up close, she could see it now, the faint transparency at the edges of him, like a reflection that didn't quite belong to the world. "I can't stay," he said gently. Her chest tightened. "You stayed long enough to save them." "That's all I was ever meant to do." She reached for his hand. This time, her fingers passed through. Tears spilled freely. "I had so many questions." "I know. I needed you." His expression broke, just for a second. "I never stopped being with you," he said. "You just couldn't see me." Outside, rescue crews rushed the aircraft. Doors were prepared for evacuation. Voices echoed through the cabin. Emily shook her head desperately. "Don't go yet." Jonathan smiled. The same smile she remembered from childhood mornings and farewell gates. "Emily," he said softly, "look at them." She turned. Through the cockpit window, she could see passengers exiting the plane, walking, crying, laughing, alive. "All of them," he continued. "They get to go home." She nodded through tears. "You gave them that." "And you," he said, "gave me a reason to come back." A knock echoed at the cockpit door. A rescue officer's voice called out, "Cockpit, open up." Jonathan stood. For a moment, he looked every inch the pilot again, straight-backed, steady, proud. He removed the headset and placed it carefully on the captain's seat. Then he turned to Emily one last time. "Live well," he said. "That's how you honor me." She choked. "I love you." His voice softened. "I know." He stepped back and faded, not abruptly, not violently, like a light dimming at dawn. The cockpit door burst open. Rescue personnel flooded in, weapons lowered, adrenaline high. "Where's the pilot?" One of them demanded. Emily looked at the empty seat. Her father was gone. There was someone here, she whispered. They searched the cockpit. Nothing. No pilot. No body. No trace. Only the headset resting neatly on the seat. And a faint warmth in the air. Hours later, as dawn broke, the truth became undeniable. The flight data recorder showed control inputs after. Captain Miller's disappearance. Inputs. That did not match any known human response pattern. ATC transcripts revealed a call sign not assigned to any active pilot. Angel. A sealed file was reopened. A missing pilot was reclassified. Status. Unknown. Emily sat alone in the terminal, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun rise through glass walls. A paramedic knelt beside her. Are you okay?" She nodded slowly. Her hand was clenched around something in her pocket. When she opened it, she gasped. A metal pilot's wings badge lay in her palm. Warm. On the back, engraved words caught the light. "Some pilots never land." Outside, The aircraft stood silent, empty, saved, and somewhere above the waking world, something finally let go of the sky.